Hi, my fellow weirdos. It's Ariel, aka She Wants the Diction, and today I wanted to talk to you about why advice for social anxiety does not work for people with autism. So when I was a young lass in my early 20s, I knew I had depression and anxiety. I didn't really understand that these fell under the larger umbrella that is autism, but at this time I believed I just had social anxiety and really bad depression. So as a result, I read a lot of books about socializing and that were specifically geared towards social anxiety sufferers. And what I found over and over again was essentially exposure therapy. Now, you learn about this in most Psychology 101 classes. It is that you keep exposing yourself to the thing you are afraid of. So say you have a specific phobia. Over time, you slowly increase your exposure to this thing you are afraid of until eventually you are able to stand being around it. Say somebody who's afraid of elevators. And it's just kind of a gradual progression. And so what I would try to do is essentially do this myself, but with socializing. So essentially I would force myself into situations that I didn't actually want to be in, like social situations. I would force myself to say yes to things like parties or book signings or hanging out with people. And what would happen is I would get to these events, I would interact with absolutely no one, I would be uncomfortable the entire time, I didn't really want to be there. Essentially I was just in panic. And I was forcing myself into these situations over and over again. Even if it was an event with people that I'd known previously, like hanging out with a couple of friends from high school at a bar, I just couldn't handle it. And a lot of times people would call me out on not being able to follow social cues, because a lot of autism ends up being copying the people around you to kind of fit in. So I had these couple of friends hanging out with them and they both laugh at something, so I laughed too, to convey that I'm there with you, I'm also appreciating this, I'm here. And I remember one of the girls turned to me and just went, "Why are you laughing? You weren't there." And I just felt like this stab in my heart, because I was like, and I tried to explain myself. I was like, "No, you don't understand. I just thought it was funny too, and whatever." But it was like she clocked me in that moment. And if you go and look at this, there are actually studies where neurotypical people can clock neurodivergent people, even though they don't realize that's what they're doing. And that is why they exclude us and bully us and call us out like that on the spot to embarrass us and different things like that. And it is because of things like that happening that I would not want to do any socializing. To me, it was just better to avoid all of it altogether. And so eventually, enough times of forcing myself into these situations where I did not enjoy myself, where I panicked, where I was upset and anxious and tense the entire night and barely spoke, I learned that it just was not going to get better from exposure. The advice didn't work on me, and I didn't understand why it didn't work. And it took me several more years after that to understand why that advice never worked, and it was horrible advice. So I'm convinced there are probably a lot of people out there that think they have social anxiety when really they are autistic, and no amount of exposing themselves to social situations will improve how they feel about social situations because they are autistic. Oh, also pro tip, if you were somebody who literally reads books about small talk, which is what I used to do. I used to read books of conversation starters. I was just trying to understand small talk, because if you are an autist, then you understand it's very difficult for you to talk about things that do not have, there has to be some sort of point, or you have to be conveying some sort of information, or there has to be a reason for you to talk to somebody. You don't just lollygag about talking about absolutely nothing, or just looking at the things in your environment and chatting up about it. To you, this makes no sense. And I realize now I read all those books because I was trying to understand what was so important about this small talk. And I memorized common small talk questions how are you doing today? Even though I didn't give a flying fuck how they were doing today. And it had nothing to do with anything, in my opinion. But if I didn't do it, then I was rude. A lot of these things I would do because I knew I would be perceived as rude if I didn't, rather than out of a genuine desire or feeling any type of anything from doing it. That is masking at its finest. If you read literal books about small talk, I can't believe it took me so long to realize I was autistic, because it's literally it's slapping you in the face. Nobody does that. Normal people don't do that. I don't know how to explain that. That's just the most autistic thing possible. But so yeah, pro tip, if you read a lot of books about small talk, you might be autistic. But anyways, that's some insight into why the typical things that you might tell somebody with social anxiety do not work for people with autism. So I really wish people would quit saying these things to us, "Oh, it'll get better if you just try. Oh, how do you know you won't like it if you never try?" It's I've put myself in the situation hundreds of thousands of times, and my reaction is the same every single time, is I want to run away, I want to be alone. I just don't like it.